You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Abram Kibalevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Clear the aisles. The Projectionist Has Semicha. Well, this is really not a typical episode of the Projectionist. We've done 43 of them. This is actually a compilation from our old program, which was called To Stir with Love, that we spent sometimes a good part of the program connecting the theme that Yitzchak Kolkowski and I were talking about with films that we thought deepened and embodied many of the aspects of conversation that we talked about in prison life. So we did two programs. One of them was about tough love and how that works in prison. And we connected a number of films to that. Captain's Courageous, the Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell film Overboard. And Yitzchak actually brought in The Day the Earth Stood Still. So I would say that you're going to hear a little bit about those films and how significant they are in terms of the transformation of characters through toughness and through change. Also Private Benjamin as well. We also did a program about prayer from a desperate place in prisons and how they work in prison, various religions, and how we minister to them. So therefore, we decided to talk about the idea of wishing the soul and outright prayer, Christian or otherwise, in film. And we talked about a number of films there as well. Elmer Gantry, the Katharine Hepburn vehicle Spitfire, and even some films that you might not think fit into that, like Pinocchio, Disney's cartoon classic, and also Big, Tom Hanks, and also The Exorcist, and other episodes of The Simpsons and Mary Tyler Moore, where we talk about prayer and who prayer is reserved for. So I think it's an interesting compilation. It's actually a compilation from two different episodes. I think we're going to string it together in a nice way. So that's a special bonus of the Projectionist. Hope you enjoy it.
Find films that have to do, or films or television shows that have to do with the subject we discussed. Sometimes it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I think this one is another one. The idea of parents and children and disciplining and tough love. I think it's like shooting fish in a barrel. But I'll let you go first, because obviously I've got 4 or 5 that I could throw out. Is there anything that tonight's subject lends you to think about, some sort of television program, a film, a Simpsons episode, perhaps?
Well, everyone knows I'm a fan of science fiction, and there's a trope that seems to be throughout science fiction, and even I understand people who take these things as maybe having some basis in reality. And that's something that seems to be coming out in the news recently about the UFOs.
Yes, UFOs. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So there was it was a theme that was repeated many times, but it was done best the first time. Was the original Day the Earth Stood Still. Basically, Klaatu is there. He's showing his power. He's showing what he can accomplish, but not out of malice, not out of we're gonna it wasn't Independence Day or the War of the Worlds, or he wasn't looking to destroy us, but he was saying if we have no choice, you're kind of forcing our hands. And it was a sort of a tough love type of approach, and it was repeated in a lot of other subsequent movies.
Let's just remind everybody that what the carpenter or whatever it was, the guy who came down, I think Klaatu was the robot that could destroy everyone.
The robot was Gort.
Oh, the robot was Gort. Klaatu was the carpenter.
Was Carpenter, yeah.
Yes,
that was his alien name.
Right. As my friend Rabbi Bechhofer's pointed out, I think many people have said that he's the Jesus figure. Carpenter
being
Jesus.
and also being killed and
Right.
resurrected and
Right. He's definitely the religious figure, the idea of from God. But in the day the earth stood still, yes, definitely. I think was it Edward? The theremin, of course, was used, I think, for the first time as the score for that film. I think it was Edward Herman. I think was the Edward Herman, right, was the score. Great film, great choice in terms of. But of course, what they wanted to do was we had to get rid of all our weapons, right? We had to basically realize that we had to destroy all our nuclear weapons or anything, our whole arsenal. I think that was it was the ultimatum, right? I think that was the ultimatum of the film.
pretty much because they were afraid that it was going to attack them. It was a self-defense interest.
Right. So basically,
but also they said that we want to invite you to be part of the League of Nations of the planets. We want you to grow and come to the next level of evolution, that you can be part of our society and not be and I listen to some of these type of people who believe in these types of things, and they suggest that this is part of what's going on in there have been a lot of claims that seem pretty credible of attacks on weapons, on our weapons from these UFO or UAP phenomenon, that and not only American weapons, but all that there is some connection there. We don't know where it's coming from.
I would refer our listeners not only to the article, the spate of articles that are coming out about this, but also a podcast that I did with Rabbi Warch about this topic, about how we could view this topic of alien visitations and things like that from a Torah perspective. But yeah, I can see the tough love there. It's not somewhat of a stretch, but I can see the fact that that was the tough love from the Federation of Planets to get us and to warn us about that we've got to change, otherwise they're going to destroy us, or we'll destroy ourselves, which I guess it's much worse than anything else we could think about. Just like
the same theme comes up in Plan 9 from Outer Space, the Cosmic Man, the Cosmic Monsters, and any number of movies use the same theme. Just not.
You know what? I think the celluloid gods are very mad at you now by mentioning these two in the same breath. Plan 9 from Outer Space and the Day the Earth Stood Still. It's sort of like
Casablanca and Ishtar and
yes. They both have to do with two people making their way across some place in Africa. I'm going to throw out things which are really, I think, Yitzchak, much more tzimzach, as we say. One of the this idea of tough love, of course, the spoiled kid who has to change his ways, otherwise he's going to just waste away his life, and he learns to become a human being. And that's, I think, from 1937, I believe, or 38. Captain's Courageous, with the inimitable, to me, the top child actor, Freddie Bartholomew. And I don't know if you've seen Freddie Bartholomew at all, but he is incredible in this. And of course, it also my father, Ova Shalom's favorite actor, Spencer Tracy, plays the not much of a good Spanish accent, but he plays, of course, the fisherman who Freddie Bartholomew is a spoiled rich kid whose father is a super wealthy person, and he's on one of these incredible Titanic-like luxury liners. And when there's a storm at sea, he gets tossed over, and he gets picked up by this very rough and tumble shipping vessel. And it's there that he has to work, because they can't send him back for some reason. I don't know. The way the sea is, they're not able to get him back to his parents, to his father, but he ends up having to work as like a lowly cabin boy and, scouring the garbage. Of course, it was based on the book by Rudyard Kipling. I'm sure you're familiar with Captain's Courageous.
Right. Yeah.
And Freddie Bartholomew becomes a mensch by the toughness. There's, of course, a in that time there was a supporting role was Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney plays the boy who is on the boat and understands things, and he sort of helps Freddie Bartholomew learn the ropes and become more of a mensch. And he really has it tough. I mean, you're crying for him when he has to realize the type of work that he has to sully himself in. So that's one. The Captain's Courageous. It's interesting that there was a script that was hanging around Hollywood for many years. Eventually, they updated it, but it was a script, I think, from the 40s or 50s. And when a new power couple arose in Hollywood, the Jewish Goldie Hawn, of course, Goldie Hawn, a nice Jewish girl, and her husband, Kurt Russell, former child star in many Disney films, and then he became this rough and tumble action star, was in a film which I think your wife would like a lot called Overboard, which is basically the same basic theme of Captain's Courageous, but they throw in amnesia as well in this film. And in this film, what happens is that Goldie Hawn plays this terrible, rich, total, I would say Jap brat. I don't know if she's ever identified as being Jewish, but she is the worst type of terrible brat and thinking that and looks down at everything. And when she goes overboard and loses her memory, she ends up Kurt Russell, who had been some sort of worker who had done some job on her boat, and she didn't pay him because she thought he had done a terrible job. He ends up somehow getting involved with her again after she loses her memory, and he convinces her that she is actually his wife. And Kurt Russell's children from a previous wife. He says, these are your kids. And she now has to relearn or learn in the first place what it means to care for another person, to be a person who cares for another human being, to be a wife, to be a mother. And of course, she goes through an evolution, of course, with amnesia, but she goes through an evolution that only the toughness of life and the responsibility of life and living up to things much different than the life she had before changes her into a much better person by the end of the film.
It's interesting you bring that up because I was listening to Dennis Prager.
Speaking about Goldie Hawn, who isn't from, but is Jewish and did have a bat mitzvah, I think. It did go to some sort of Hebrew school training. Come on, Goldie. Come on, you can't get more Jewish than that. Goldie's has another film which I recommend, Private Benjamin, which has I think an Academy. I think Eileen Brennan also had a stint as one of the original. She was on some comedy program. I think originally. I think she might have been in Laugh-In also, along with Goldie Hawn together. I think. Anyway, the point is that I don't know if Eileen Brennan is Jewish, but because Goldie Hawn is Jewish, Howard Zieff, the director, of course, is Jewish, and the story is a wonderful story about a spoiled Jewish girl. Goldie, I forgot what her first, Judy Benjamin, yeah, that's her name, Judy, another good Jewish name. How Judy Benjamin ends up, again, a spoiled rich Jewish girl who ends up really changing her life, and by going into the army, and she's not pampered there. She has to become tough, and she has to learn responsibility, and whatever hijinks ensues, I think by the end of the film, everybody sees that accepting responsibility and accepting pain and recognizing the rules and living according to them and knowing disappointment when you don't have them and earning things through the tough love that's being demonstrated towards you turns you into a much better person. And I think everybody who, again, Goldie Hawn does a great job of playing both ends there and seeing that a person who has gone through this is really a much happier, much more content, a much more solid individual. And I think that's for me, I guess that's enough. I think to inspire us, especially when things get tough, like you say, Bein HaMitzarim or not. It's always hard to especially when the kids turn on the puppy dog eyes. But remember, when that occurs, I think it's like we have to admit that it really as they say, again, I'm not going to say this hurts me more than it hurts you, because that was always what was said, in films and in books.
And my father used to say it too.
Did your father actually slapped you? Your father used to spank you sometimes?
Yeah, but he said, he would use that term. He would use something along those lines, and he really meant it. Like you felt it. It wasn't cheesy or fake. You really felt like, oh, it really does hurt him more.
Anybody that loves their children, obviously cannot see them hurt in any way. And it is something that there's a lot of depth to. Normally, when you think about it in a cinematic context, it in many ways is portrayed negatively. And I think, this has to do a little bit with Hollywood's discomfort with the whole idea of actually religious prayer and in God being in any film in any real way. Now we know that there is Bruce Almighty and Oh God, where they actually pushed sort of an idea of God that I guess was palatable, and you had Morgan Freeman, of course, and George Burns, being God, as it were. And I think people were, most people were okay with it. But I think normally, that's, I think, the exception that proves the rule. Mostly, I think in films that both you and I are familiar with, it's almost like wishing is standard. You have, I'll take one that many people love, Tom Hanks's Breakout film in many ways, Big. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I'm sure your wife has. Directed by Penny Marshall. And she's not Jewish, but she could be. Laverne, I think, right? I don't know if she's Laverne or Shirley. She's one of the two. But anyway.
I always thought she was Jewish. She seems so Jewish.
Yeah, I told you she could be Jewish. She's not. Her and her brother, Gary. Gary, of course, is a director of Runaway Bride and many other, So Gary Marshall, his name was Marshak. I think they were Polish or something, Armenian. They're very close to being Jewish, both of them. They could both get away with playing Jews, I think. But Penny Marshall was the director of Big. And as you know, in the film, Tom Hanks, when he realizes that, the girl at school considers him, too young and too immature and too short. And as much as he has his friends, he wants to be older. And he wishes he was big. Of course, where he does this is not just, wishing in some alcove. He wishes to be big, and when he goes to an amusement park, and there's some sort of, creepy type of one of these creepy type of I'm not sure what you would call it. You get a ticket, and it gives you your fortune, and it's some sort of demonic type wizard that somehow grants his wish. And of course, he realizes what it's like to be big, and he becomes an adult overnight. It does a great job, Tom Hanks, really being an adult, being a child in an adult's body, and everybody praised his acting ability, his comedic chops, and etc. However, it's not a prayer. Even let's talk about the one of the most famous wishes in cinematic history, Pinocchio, right, from Walt Disney. I'm not sure exactly how Pinocchio has enough life to be able to wish, but somehow he does wish, right? And as Jiminy Cricket tells him, he can wish upon a star, right? And he wishes upon a star. He basically, wishes to some avodah zarah, and he, and he sort of becomes almost a real boy. Right. So, Hollywood was somehow is happy with this. And of course, there's probably about 900 Twilight Zone episodes where somebody wishes for something to happen. And, Mickey Rooney wishes that or something happens, and then he grows so big that he falls over from the giant height that he has, or somebody else wishes. Right. But idea of prayer is very conspicuously absent, right? It's like the idea of actually praying. It almost feels, Yitzchak, that the people who pray are strange and are out there, and Hollywood was ashamed of that. I don't know if I don't know I think Anthony Hopkins in his Nixon portrayal, I think there is a scene where he's praying with Henry Kissinger. You're aware, of course, about this idea that Nixon was praying right before the impeachment vote. Did you hear about that once?
Yes.
And supposedly he got on his knees. Henry, get on your knees, and we're going to pray together. So, similarly, I with your wife a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and the only character I think that I ever saw pray. Rhoda doesn't daven over there, but the one who prays is Ted. Ted, who's considered the foolish, childish, cheap, inappropriate person. When Murray has a fight with his wife, and Murray sleeps at Ted's house, Ted prays before he goes to sleep. So, and he's made fun of. He's considered infantile and childlike. The idea that he should pray. And again, we talked in a previous episode about people talking to Santa Claus. I mentioned Miracle on 34th Street, I think, that time, and Natalie Wood did such a great job praying, but she's actually wishing and hoping that Santa, and she becomes dismayed because she's this cynical little girl. She's Margaret O'Hara's daughter, and I think John Payne, I think, is the love interest. But she's the little girl, the little smart girl, and she's wishing to Santa. We're afraid here to refer to it as a prayer. Natalie Wood, of course, in a later role, when she plays Louise, later to become the famous burlesque stripper Gypsy Rose Lee in the movie version of Gypsy. She also has a wonderful scene, Natalie Wood, where she's wondering, it's her birthday, and everybody has Rahmanas on her, and they give her a little fish for her birthday, or they give her a little lamb, and she says, I hope I'll get my wish. Right? Wishing is great, but praying, davening, finding a God to connect to, somehow that Hollywood was extremely anxious about that. All right, except I guess only the horror films might be a little bit different, right?
That's it's a fascinating thing how there is. It's not always prayer in the way that we would think of. Sometimes there is that element, but there is certainly a much more of a comfort with religious elements in the horror films, although there was backlash on those as well, always. But I think that goes back. Maybe you might disagree, but I think part of this really goes back to even the Renaissance or medieval times. If you notice, Shakespeare had no issue using like the real old-fashioned of pagan Avodah Zarah. First of all, a lot of the characters were pagan. King Lear or whatever, they were from the pagan era. But as far as what I understand was the reason for that was because it was taboo. The clergy would be upset if you're going to make reference to anything that they actually worship in their traditions.
I'm not sure if that's listen. What you're saying is probably accurate about Elizabethan times and what Shakespeare had to deal with. It didn't seem to me that the 20th century Jewish moguls that were producing the films in Hollywood.
I think they were afraid that they're going to be accused of blasphemy because it's not just their own cynicism about religion and prayer, as much as that because they were not Christians. They were mostly Jews. They might be accused of however they're approaching it, of something that is offensive in some form because of that, and so it winds up. You didn't have the cynicism as much though earlier on as you did later. There was this wholesome church-going idea. When you're talking about 1970s already, and Ted Baxter on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, that was already an era when people were not as it was in the 60s and 70s. People,
yeah. You're right. I lived that era, and you're right. Being religious then was considered somewhat odd, but I think even in the 20s and 30s, we talk about
The
horror
20s and
films.
30s also was a time
There
that
was a rise of spiritualism, but actually a decline in organized religion.
and the
There was
20s and 30s also.
there was everybody. People wanted to connect to the dead. Arthur Conan Doyle was very into seances and things like that.
And Houdini, who grew up, with a father was a rabbi of some sort.
So these were like, again, like
I think
sort of
Houdini
like,
even put on tefillin every day, but he was very involved with seances and.
right. So this spiritualism was taking the place, before the world wars or in between the world wars, of organized religion, and somehow that, I think, is what Hollywood was more comfortable with. I saw a film, one of the films I've tried to get you to watch is Elmer Gantry. I've mentioned it before, and of course there you have a faith healer, played incredibly by Gene Simmons, who starts believing in her own powers of prayer. Burt Lancaster plays, obviously, he plays Elmer Gantry, who's quite cynical, but is basically going along for the ride. He himself has an inner connection to prayer because it's got an energy and excitement that he likes, the church and the singing, but there's a hollowness on his inside. Whereas in the Gene Simmons character, Sharon Falconer, she believes that she actually is an agent of God, and there are a number of scenes where she actually, at the revival meeting, where she is praying and she prays over someone and she's able to heal somebody. And the person is no longer crippled. He was able to walk now because of her. And however, you deal with these phenomena, again, the film, Richard Brooks, who directed the film, it really is something to think about, because in Hollywood, that was 1960, but it was sort of like, we're not sure exactly what we're going to present here. The church, of course, banned the film in many places because of its cynicism towards religion. I saw another film which I was very surprised about. I think I mentioned it to you in a previous conversation. I think you knew about it. It was one of Katharine Hepburn's early films called Spitfire, where she plays a backwoods Ozarks girl, or somewhere in Tennessee, and the TVA, Roosevelt's TVA, is building a dam near there, and they're hiring some of these backwoods people and giving them jobs. But in the backwoods, there's this girl, and it's based on a play written by a woman, and Katharine Hepburn. This is 1934. She is able. They consider her a wild hillbilly girl, and she has a hard time keeping that Southern accent out of her, Northeast, where she came from. But
Atlantic accent, yeah.
Yeah, but again, she keeps. I don't know if it's the South. Her accent was only mildly, I think, worse than mine before.
No, you did a good job. It was too good.
Yeah, but anyway, I was better than Kate. But Kate, in this role, she was young. She was in her 20s, I think, when she made this, and she's supposed to be playing an 18-year-old girl who is a spiritual dynamo, who, even though she's unlearned, but somehow her prayers work. And somehow she has these cards that she stole from the church, these cards with images. And even though she's this wild hillbilly girl that everybody thinks is strange, she throws rocks at people, she has a black cat, and she brings people back, people who were in a coma, she's able to bring them back from their coma. And now that they're able to, and of course the backwoods people consider her a witch. They consider her someone who's somehow commiserating with the devil. But really, in a lot of soliloquies, Katharine Hepburn speaks to God, she speaks to Jesus, and she understands things. In fact, the one place where her prayer doesn't work, there's a baby that she's nursing that she steals from the backwoods couple that's letting the baby die, and she steals the baby, and she nurses the baby to health. But when the baby is taken back to the parents, the baby gets ill again, and she is put on the spot. Will she be able to pray and save the baby? And she's not able to. And she says in an incredibly deep, in my mind, this explanation of why she couldn't save the baby. And she said, because I was on trial then, and I was praying for myself. I wasn't just praying for the child. If it would have been totally lishma, then God would have heard my prayers and it could have worked. But because I was praying to prove myself, therefore there was something wrong with the prayer. And to me, and again, the film also starts with some, warning from the producers that, maybe there's something that we can gain from, this world of religion, even though, many people make fun of it. And Ralph Bellamy and Robert Young are it's sort of like a triangle. They both have an interest in her. And Ralph Bellamy specifically always plays a nice guy.
Right.
And I think you're definitely a Ralph Bellamy fan, right? Wasn't he in the front page? Isn't one of your favorite Razin Russell movies?
Yeah, he was in His Girl Friday. He was in His Girl Friday. He was also in The Wolfman.
Oh, he was Wolfman too, I hear. So Ralph Bellamy plays the guy who recognizes the spiritual essence of this woman and what this could mean. Anyway, I guess, like I said, it strikes me that the idea, the only place you're going to find prayer, like in Despicable Me. Did you see Despicable Me? Did your kids see the story of Gru? And you haven't seen that at all?
My kids said they saw it.
Okay,
I saw part of it. Yeah.
So in Despicable Me, who prays? One of the little girl, the little orphan girl prays. Prayer is reserved for the small children, the Ted Baxter type minds, the weirdos, or the Christian movies where prayer is going to be featured. It's interesting, how, as you say, it seems to me that it still seems to be taboo. The idea of connecting to God, even if it's not in an organized way, specifically reaching out to God when you need him. Obviously, it's a Wonderful Life. Jimmy Stewart eventually does pray, and it is one of the greatest prayers I think that's ever been put on celluloid. You've seen It's a Wonderful Life from beginning to end, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so when Jimmy Stewart finally says, and you can hear his voice cracking, and when he prays, and of course, it's funny because he's really praying. He's only in an illusion anyway, right? He's really just praying for God. The nightmare of Potterville is not a reality. This is a vision that he's been able to step into, an alternate universe that he's been able to enter. But he doesn't, he doesn't need God to do anything, right? I think that It's a Wonderful Life is definitely, I think, a place where you could turn to think about what does it mean to be at the end of your rope, and to speak to God and to utter those words. It's not the nusach akela godol agibra v'anoira. It's not ashrei, but it's dvar mayotzim min halev. And I think
I remember we with Rabbi Weinberger we watched The Sixth Sense in Ezra Academy, and how at the beginning of the movie, even though it's not set in a mode of prayer, just the pasuk is there. Mamakim Krasich Hashem, from out of the depths I call unto you, O Lord. It's there scrawled out on a piece of paper in the beginning of The Sixth Sense. And I remember Rabbi Weinberger pointing out, look, it's Mamakim Krasich Hashem. I remember, that. But and it's interesting because you even in movies that have a lot of religious context, you don't always have. We mentioned earlier the movie Heavens Above, which is a movie about religion and clergy, and you don't have this really expression of prayer, or even, and we talked about the Pilgrim with Charlie Chaplin. You don't see an expression of prayer. You see a sermon. Sermons come up, I think, a lot more in movies than prayers. Maybe it's because they're more dramatic, but they're obviously in an in a extemporaneous prayer, you do have a lot of drama, but it's not something you see that much. One example though is the Simpsons, the very famous episode where Bart sells his soul to Milhouse.
Yes,
and
Bart.
Which is a very deep and a very a lot of.
It's a wonderful episode. I've shown it to my students a number of times. It's definitely one of the.
So Bart does
about what the neshama is. Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's something that even Al Pi Kabbalah, that Lisa tells the Bart, I'm not a theologian, but some people say you're not born with a soul, but you earn it, and you earned your soul through this very sincere prayer. And the truth is, if you look in the Kisvei Ari, you do have this idea of that the Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama are gained at different parts of davening, and Neshama Yisera, that it's gained through, although it's through liturgical prayer. There is the idea that the neshama is something that it's not something that's essential to the person, but something that's gained.
Oh, okay, so what I would say is like this, Yitzchak. I know you love The Simpsons, and I agree. The Simpsons, there's been books written about the Simpsons putting religion on the map. I think there's been a number of ministers who have talked about God in The Simpsons. God is definitely a character in The Simpsons quite often. Homer, of course, has a deal with God. And prayer does happen, and The Simpsons, I think
it's an anomaly. And I remember that being pointed out. There was a TV show, it was a local TV show, but I think it had some national acclaim. It was called The God Squad, and it was a Reform rabbi and a Catholic priest. I think he became a Monsignor. The priest passed away from cancer. I don't remember his name, but there was the Rabbi Golub, I think, was the Reform rabbi from Long Island who had this TV show, and he was lamenting about how you turn on a show like, which I watched when I was a kid, Saved by the Bell. You don't see them going to church. You don't see them, they hang out whereas on The Simpsons, they're at church a lot, and a regular TV show.
Although The Simpsons actually does a lot, to burst the bubble of Reverend Lovejoy, right? It talks about, showing how, empty many people are at church, and of course, we could do a whole program about the religiosity in The Simpsons. I just want to say one thing, that programs like, the Wishing and Souls are standard Hollywood and television staple. Your soul, right? Your soul, like, I can take your soul. You sell your soul to the devil, or we switch souls, right? Your soul goes here, right? But the idea that the soul is a creation of God who breathed that soul into you, and the fact that your soul is your method of connecting to God, that is something where, that's where it's hands off. They like, the idea of a otherworldly power that animates you, all for that. So give me your astral self, Dr. Strange, that they're happy about. But the idea that the neshama is really what allows us to connect to God, and it's something that gives us. Again, zombies are great. People who come back from the dead, that's tremendous. Devils that shade him, that come in. I think you mentioned to me a while ago. Even genies are basically, as you are basically shade him. That we love them, but again, there's a discomfort with the idea of praying, and I think that
that when it comes to the horror movies, there is that spiritual element that comes out. There's no issue with scaring away Dracula with the cross, and even in a science fiction movie, like, it's considered, even though it's not really one of my favorites, but it's considered to be one of the greatest of the science fiction genre of the 50s, was War of the Worlds, and it ends off with they're going through, he's going from one church to another looking for this woman, and they recognize that it was pretty much the power of their prayer that saved the world from the Martians at the end. So it comes up every now and then in places where you don't expect it, and it's that's part of the.
Well, again, we talk about, probably at its time, it was such a It was probably one of the most famous films. I mean, it was so incredible. Everybody was watching it. Of course, was The Exorcist, which there you have a demon that possesses someone, and of course he's not the hero, but in a way he is, right? Father Carrot. Right? There's a number of fathers there, right? He's
it's one I never actually saw, but I'm familiar with it. I remember reading that the author of the book that it was based on said he did not consider it to be a horror genre story, but rather a spiritual one, in a true spiritual religious sense, of an expression of faith. And and sometimes when people are in trauma, I guess, to go back to how we started, I often think about, there was a scene on the episode of Seinfeld where George is sitting with his therapist, and he tells the therapist, "God will not let me succeed." And the therapist said, "George, I thought you told me you don't believe in God." He said, "Well, I do for the bad things." It's back to the whole, there's no atheist in a foxhole. And it's unfortunate that's how people, they associate religion and God with the bad things, and it's not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think unfortunately our people have in many ways been the skeptics, right? We've always been the skeptics. Even in The Exorcist, there is a character, Dr. Klein, who is the one who's scientifically trying to figure out what's wrong with Regan, and I think he gets beaten up. I think by it's beaten up by Linda Blair. So the point is,
I'll tell you. I think you said Rabbi Bart Sadok, who I met a few times. He told me he's actually performed exorcisms. He got rid of the Debukim and people, and he knows the Kabbalah behind it, Lemaisa, and he's involved.
We can get him. Let's get Rabbi Bart Sadok.
He told me that one time there was a Jewish, ethnically Jewish atheist psychologist who asked him to perform an exorcism on a patient of his. And he said, why are you asking me this if you don't really believe in it? And he said, I think it will, help this person, psychologically, even though I think it's all nonsense. But if this is going to be in her mind, and then the psychologist was shocked to see that this was real, that the person's voice actually changed. It was something clearly supernatural was happening right before his eyes.
Well, look, Yitzchak, I think we can end up with this. I think there are so many proofs to the supernatural phenomena. Whether it's and there are, you can debunk only so much of them. There's enough indicators of that olam that we know is olam haruchni, the olam malachim, the olam, whatever olam as it is. What's incredible is, despite all the various proofs of it, to make that leap beyond is still so hard for so many people. And the fear of actually being makabel, that there's not only just that world, but a world that is run by a boirei, by a creator who is there. And as we said before, as you said so greatly to that Baptist fellow, is there to accept you and to accept you lovingly and can help you out of any tsar as a rock and a redeemer. That's it, my friends, for about this week, this extra long episode. Keep daven, of course, all the time, not only the Shemona Esrei 3 times a day, but also don't be afraid to have your own nischayos, your own tefillas and bakoshas, ala Rav Nachman, and be inspired. Be inspired. Take care, Yitzchak. We'll see you.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.